Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. The bigger picture, only on Money FM 89.3.
Good morning. Welcome to the bigger picture. Me, Ryan Huang. And we are talking about cryptocurrencies today. And of course, with all things Bitcoin, it has been on a bit of a journey so far. We have been seeing record prices in recent weeks. And right now, a lot of tailwinds supporting many other crypto coins as well. And according to Gemini's recent State of Crypto report, more Singaporean investors apparently are jumping on board. In fact, Singapore leads with the highest crypto ownership rate at 28%. So that's an increase from 26% last year. So what's driving it and what's more to come? So let's check in now with Saad Ahmed. He is the head of APAC for Gemini. Good morning.
Morning, Ryan.
Great to have you in the studio today. So let's talk about what is in this report, which basically paints a pretty good picture of where things are for crypto adoption in Singapore and everywhere else. What would be the standout stat for you?
I mean, I think for me, it's just like the overall picture is that there's growing institutionalization, there's growing adoption, and it's happening pretty much across the board, right? And I think if you look at what's happened in the last couple of years with the overall industry, right? So beginning of 2024, we had the approval of the spot Bitcoin ETFs. And I think that was a big moment, right? Because that's a vehicle in which pretty much everyone's familiar with how to invest in ETFs.
It's very easy on an exchange. You don't need a cold wallet, hot wallet, whatnot.
None of those things, right? Like you can go into your stockbroking app and just like you buy any other stock, you can allocate to that vehicle. And so those pipes are there. The institutions are very familiar with what those look like. And yeah, they've been allocating. And I think that coupled with the fact that now we have an administration in the US, the previous administration was antagonistic towards crypto. And this one is kind of the opposite of that. So the policy changes are yet to come. That takes time to pass through the House and the Senate. However, the fact that that's coming and the direction is that that's coming gives people a lot of confidence and takes out some of the tail risk to this asset class. That's really been exciting, and that's why you're seeing kind of the positive movement in prices.
Yeah, I was quite fascinated the number. 28% of Singaporeans, at least in Singapore investors, have adopted crypto. What is typical investor journey like? Where do they enter into this space? Is it always Bitcoin?
Not necessarily. I think people go on their own journey, and I think, it is a personal journey for most people. I mean, I can share my story. I used to be a gold bug, and then a friend of mine told me in 2019 that, hey, sell 10% of your gold and buy Bitcoin. And I was like, if I'm going to do that, I'm going to read up everything I can about it. And I went down the rabbit hole. But for most people, it's, sometimes they go through the meme coins. And that's something that comes out in our report as well. Especially with Gen Z, they're discovering it through meme coins because meme coins are kind of like a cultural moment, easy to understand. They don't pretend to have much utility. And so it's an easy way to enter the space. But others, they might go down the, researching Ethereum or Solana or any of the layer ones, right? And so I think that journey is personal to everyone. But eventually, I think people do come to realize that, Bitcoin ultimately drives the whole space in many respects and is the king. But yeah.
Sounds like it's speaking to a specific demographic. What is the typical crypto investor like in terms of profile?
Well, to be honest, that's such a hard question to answer because I think we see such a huge range, right? A couple of days ago, we had this event where we had a fireside chat with Jeremy Tan, the Bitcoin candidate in the recent GE. We had 200 people in the audience. We had 700 people who were watching on live stream. And right after the chat, I was talking to students from NUS, and they were there, and they were excited about the space. And then I was talking to this lady who was a retiree. She was like 65 years old, and she was talking to me about how she's been allocating since 2018, and she's been doing self-custody. I was so surprised, and she's a Gemini customer, and so we see the whole range, right, from young kids as young as like 17, 18 who are still in college, all the way to retirees. So Bitcoin operates on what's called proof of work. And it's really interesting, but to really get it, you kind of have to put in the work, right?
Yeah.
Like you gotta go down the rabbit hole, you gotta do your reading, you gotta understand the asset class. So that's kind of what we see on our side.
Yeah, so Bitcoin on the year to date has been up some 11% in the past 12 months, up over 57%. And you mentioned you were meeting with a lot of investors across the board. What sort of questions are you getting from them these days? How has it evolved from the early days when you were in the business?
Look, I think, the asset class has obviously evolved, right? I mean, I'll just give you an example of nation state adoption. I love thinking about this because it kind of contrasts what happened in the last cycle versus what's happening in this cycle. So the last cycle, pretty much the only sort of sovereign nation state that was adopting was, El Salvador, the South American country, right? And then that was kind of making the news and everyone was talking about how El Salvador is adopting Bitcoin. In this cycle, you've got the strategic reserve, Bitcoin reserve in the US, right? You've got nation states like Bhutan that are mining their own Bitcoin. You've got, I think Pakistan announced recently something, and Mubadala, which is the sovereign wealth fund of the UAE, and they allocated somewhere like $500 million, and that barely made the news, right? And some of these are just like nation states that are probably doing this without even talking about it because they don't want the price to run.
Do you see
right?
this momentum continuing, especially when you hear of how companies like GameStop are thinking about putting a reserve in Bitcoin, MicroStrategy as well, more corporates going into that space?
100%. So, what we're seeing, so I was recently at the Bitcoin conference in Las Vegas. It was 35,000 people, and it was tough to walk away from that not being bullish. But today, there's roughly about 100 publicly listed companies around the world that are putting Bitcoin in their corporate treasury, right? And the pace we're seeing and some of the interest we're seeing, that number is likely to be 1,000 in the next couple of years. Very likely, right? And I think people are realizing that if they have cash in their treasury or they're putting treasuries or bonds in their treasury, they're going to be the bag holders, right? Because it's a melting ice cube. And that's why they're looking at the most pristine reserve asset that has ever been created to put on their treasuries.
Wow. So it sounds like you're suggesting that Bitcoin's reputation has evolved to become a bit of a safe haven asset.
I would say so. I think people are realizing that it's better at being gold than gold as a hedge against inflation and, practices that will lead to higher inflation, money printing and all of that, right? So I think it's found its place within the institutional adoption as well as, more and more retail customers are finding out. And it's in fact one of those few asset classes where retail sort of has an edge to, as opposed to institutions because it's easier for retail to allocate because it takes much longer for institutions to kind of get all of the things in place to be able to adopt it.
Okay, so to wrap things up, what are some of the things investors should be mindful of in terms of risk management when they get into the crypto space? Because we also hear about crashes in Bitcoin prices from time to time, meme coins going bankrupt. So how risky is it to get into this space?
I would say that, that risk tolerance is personal, right? I would say, I think you need to separate Bitcoin from the rest of the industry, right? In some respects, because Bitcoin is a reserve asset, institutional grade reserve asset. Yes, it's volatile, but over a long term, that volatility is to the upside. However, I think one way to manage risk is, of course, position sizing, right? And that depends on your risk tolerance. If you're someone who's obviously older, closer to retirement, I would say start with like a low percent allocation, whether it's 1%, 2%, 5%, that depends on your risk tolerance. If you're somebody younger, you can allocate a larger, it ultimately comes down to position sizing and that's how you kind of manage risk.
So calibrate according to your own investor profile.
Absolutely.
All right, good idea to start looking at Bitcoin. Perhaps we've been in conversation with Saad Ahmed. He is the head of APAC for Gemini, helping us out this morning. Thanks for your time this morning, Saad.
Thanks for having me.
Before acting on the information on Money FM, please consider if it's suitable for your own investment objectives, financial situation, and risk tolerance. To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.